Hey, welcome back to another episode of Revealed Apologetics. I'm your host, Eli Ayala, and I am very excited to have a very special guest here tonight, Melissa Dougherty of the Melissa Dougherty channel. I hope I'm saying her last name right.
Oh yeah, you
Um,
are.
Thank you very much. Yeah, so if you guys have been following my channel here at Revealed Apologetics and you've never heard of Melissa Dougherty, I highly recommend you kind of put this video on pause and hop over to her channel and hit that subscribe button. She's got some excellent resources with a touch of humor while she covers some of these really important topics relating to evangelism, apologetics, the new age, things like this. And so that's kind of what we're going to be discussing today. So I want to jump right into this interview and just before I start asking my questions, Melissa, why don't you just take a moment and say hello to my audience?
Sure. Hi, I'm Melissa Dougherty. Everything he just said is true. Yeah, my channel is a mixed bag. You'll find theology, apologetics, satire, all the things.
Okay. And what made you kind of focus on the specific topics you focus on? I mean, when I first heard about you, you were very much associated with like content relating to like the new age, which
hmm
I've never really had a lot of exposure to except by like reading some of like Walter Martin's books in the Kingdom of the Cult. And I think there was a book by Douglas Gruteis, the
Yeah.
Christian apologist, where he wrote some books on New Age. How did you get associated with that topic specifically?
Yeah, that's kind of an interesting question because I always thought I was an ex-New Ager. And maybe I
Hmm.
was, maybe like 20% ex-New Age. But then
Okay.
I started realizing after I became a Christian and I got into this wiggity whack belief stuff, weird things, and I came out of it. And when I came out of it, I'm like, oh, it was new age. All of it was new age. But I started learning right away what I was in looked a lot more Christian than what other people are asking me about. Like people were asking me, for example, let me give you some new age terms. Reiki. Reiki is a new age thing. Yoga, you have karma, reincarnation, sacred geometry, numerology, astrology, tarot, psychic readings, maybe arguably even ghost hunting. You have these things where that fit in a bucket. It's more Eastern in origin, like Hinduism, Buddhism. And I'm like, okay, I wasn't into a lot of these things. I was into crystals a little bit, vibrations, frequencies of crystals. And I went to a psychic one time as a Christian because I was open-minded and I wasn't judging. And I thought that they were basically modern day prophets. But I didn't get involved in actually doing tarot for myself. I didn't really understand tarot or what psychics did a whole lot. It wasn't something I was involved in. What I was in looks, again, a lot more Christian. And so it really took me a long time to understand, oh, I guess I'm technically not an ex-New Ager. I was into it, some of it. I'm actually technically an ex-New Thoughter, which is what I just wrote a book called Happy Lies about the New Thought movement.
Sure.
And the idea is that these are two different movements. It was like such an epiphany to me because I'd been in ministry for years, over a decade at this point. I'm like, oh man, I've always kind of loosely defined it. I'm like, I was more into New Thought, but it's all the same thing. It just hit me like a bag of bricks when I'm like, oh no, these are two different movements. And it
So you're
explained a lot.
so
Yeah,
you're saying there's a difference between New Age and New Thought?
100%.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Yeah, well, I'll let you finish there. I was making sure I was understanding that
Yeah,
correctly there.
yeah. And so that's New Age. I think I've kind of explained it a little bit. And there's a lot. I give a whole list in my book, and even that's not justified in the extension that I could have gone. I think I gave a pretty good list of what would be considered more Eastern. You have
Sure.
theosophy, transcendental meditation, ancient aliens, star seeds, light work. It would be considered more New Age. Mother
Mm,
Earth worship. What I was into, I thought was Christian, that it was just a more enlightened form of Christianity. This is where New
sure.
Thought will get you. New Thought will get you before the New Age will, because it's made to look Christian. And so it's more Gnostic in origin
Mm,
instead of Eastern. And so if I were to define New Thought in a sentence, I would say it's the positive thinking movement in America with Jesus as its mascot. And then in two words, I would say it's metaphysical Christianity. That's actually how they define it. People in New Thought would
okay.
define it, is that it's metaphysical Christianity, which is beyond the physical. It's more enlightened. It's about the power of your mind. Um, some terms that are unique to just New Thought: manifestation, visualization, the law of attraction, Christ consciousness is a big one. You're a co-creator with God, your words and thoughts having power, speaking things into existence, that you should always, your body should never be sick. This was actually a very big New Thought. And the New Thought movement was a big proponent in what Christians might understand as like the health and wealth prosperity teachings that actually really originated with New Thought. New Thought had the belief that we were never separate from God, which, to be fair, a lot of belief systems have that. But again, this is their idea of who the Christian God is and what the Bible supposedly says and what Jesus taught. And so there's a lot of misused scriptures and a lot of Jesus thrown into it. They want to be known as being Christian in origin. Let's just put it that way. And so there's a lot of this idea that you are perfect, you are good, and you are divine. And the material, this is where it gets real Gnostic, the material realm, okay, is an extension of your mind, right? That there's a spiritual realm that's perfect. There's like a perfect version of you, if you will. So if there's something wrong in the material realm, which is actually an extension of the reality you create with your mind, then you can fix it. So think of that for a second. Run with that. What would you create if your mind could create? The three things that people want are money, romance, and health. And so that's the idea, is that, well, you deserve those things. You are a creative being. And so you bring forth from the spiritual realm into the physical, whatever it is. If there's something wrong with your body, well, then you fix it through your thoughts, words, and especially, very important, your feelings. You have to feel it. Your feelings are a powerful mechanism to create and manifest your reality. So as you can see, there is some overlap with New Age. There's many overlaps. In fact, one of the most occultic things they have in common is they both have a tendency to get information from spirits. So a lot of the things that I told you came from spirits like angels and the fathers of the New Thought movement who were trying to give enlightened spiritual information about what Jesus supposedly really said. There were many people in the beginning of New Thought that were kind of looked at as basically prophets, that they were giving this new information. It was secret knowledge that was able to be given at this time that was like suppressed before. So they were looked at as the givers of this knowledge. They were worthy of that, right? And they would be able to express it to you, and you could now know the secrets. And so from the New Thought movement spawned so many things that we don't realize exist because of this movement. One of them is the self-help movement. The entire foundation of the self-help movement began with New Thought authors. And one of the main attractions of the New Thought movement was the idea that you could have the control and power that God had, that what God once had, it now applies to you. And it also, this was really interesting too. Sorry, I read old, dusty New Thought books, like history books in my free time. They exist, but nobody reads them. I love them.
Okay. All right.
Yeah. And so in my mind, I'm just going over this history, but it's really interesting what it did to critical thinking. And if you might know this, because you mentioned that your background is more Pentecostal, but around the 1800s, there was just a lot of crud, like spiritual crud going on. You had a lot of cults come up. It was post-Enlightenment.
That was a great historical analysis. In the 1800s, we've experienced a great amount of spiritual crud. We're getting technical here, folks.
Terms, man. I mean, I'm here all week.
Dr. Greg Bahnsen was a renowned Christian apologist, philosopher, and seminary professor, and his life's work is now at your fingertips with Bahnsen U. Bahnsen U aims to bring seminary-level education to every Christian anytime, anywhere, absolutely free. Gain access to over 140 courses covering theology, apologetics, eschatology, and law, featuring sermons, seminary lectures, and more from the legendary Dr. Greg Bonson. Now, if you sign up today at apologiastudios.com and join over 13,000 users already benefiting from this incredible resource, you will not regret it. And soon, they're expanding with Bonson U Plus and Bonson U Live, bringing fresh supplemental learning and real-time engagement. Again, go to apologiastudios.com and start your journey today. I did have a question though. So
Sure, yeah.
you were talking about kind of this idea of kind of like the physical and the spiritual. Is there any connection with kind of Platonic philosophy in terms of which?
Yes.
Okay,
Oh,
because
you're sharp.
you're talking about the immaterial being the perfect and the material being kind of the imperfect. That connects. I'm jiving with the Gnosticism, but that sounds very Platonic.
Yeah.
Okay,
I'm actually impressed that you noticed that. Yes.
I'll be here all day and just
Yeah. Yeah, man. If you could start with one, put it this way, if you could start with one baton of where this all started, it would be a slimy serpent in a garden telling you that you can be like God. That's where the first lie was told. And then that baton gets handed, right? And it evolves into something else. Yeah, Platonic. And you have Gnosticism, and then you have this, and then you have that. And now it's turned into this movement that like everybody knows about, but nobody knows its name. And even adherents in this movement talk exactly what we're saying, like the history of it. They wouldn't say, oh, it's the serpent's lie. If they're to get, some of them do lean more Gnostic, right? And they'll say that Satan isn't the bad guy, right? Because in Gnosticism, he's the good guy. He's the light bringer. He was telling the truth about your identity, and whoever wrote this, makes them look like he's a bad guy, so it can be Satanist, and it can get messy, right? But yeah, you're exactly right. It does go back to this material versus spiritual realm, and it was repeatedly brought up in my research when I would read these history books. I remember looking it up, and I'm like, okay, hold on, which person are we talking about? We're talking about Plato the philosopher, Platon. Is this the same thing? I had to actually like go and look.
Sure.
Yeah.
I think that's why it can be complicated too, because a lot of
Mhm.
the Greek philosophical thought kind of overlaps with each other.
And the names sound the same.
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah.
Now you did mention when you were throwing around some of the vocabulary there, you mentioned
Sure.
something about crystals. Now, when I was in college, I was a friend with a girl who was a Wiccan, and I don't know if this is something that is connected to Wicca, or she was maybe she didn't even know that they were separate or whatever. But she used to come in with this little briefcase of like crystals. And she's like, this crystal over here is the color over there. This means this. And I was into apologetics back then too. I was like, well, we need to talk a little bit. But I was like, what is that something is she practicing New Age, or is there something in Wicca, if you're familiar with Wicca at all, that involves crystals or anything along those lines?
I am not as familiar with Wicca as I am with New Age. But I mean, as you can tell, I mean, they all kind of cheat off the same paper with kind of these things. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Definitely. I have in my, it's kind of a salad bar, right? Because I was a Christian, born again, right? Got into some wiggity whack stuff thinking it was Christian. But then it makes you really open-minded to like a lot of other spiritualities and religions, by the way. And so, I mean, that's where that came from. Because, and the other thing in New Thought that's very misused is science. Like quantum mechanics and neuroscience are the two most common ones. And they talk a lot about vibrations and frequencies of your words and your thoughts, mainly your thoughts and emotions. And so I carried that over. It made perfect sense to me that crystals and gems had an energy to them, that the earth has an energy. That would be more New Thought, but I could see how I could have carried that over. But it technically would be more New Age in that regard. As far as I know, I wouldn't say that it wouldn't be divorced completely from witchcraft though either. I just remember how it would work, right? You carry around your quartz, your moonstone, your emerald, or whatever it is. And if you're feeling a certain way, well, that energy of that gem it's like think of like the Catholic saints, right? Like one is built for each thing. And you go to this crystal for this particular ailment if you want to attract money to you. Oh, and oils worked the same way, by the way. Oils had a certain energy, a vibration to them, and it helped enhance your vibration. So I remember I actually had a friend. We had this oil that was I was waitressing for a while, and we had this oil that we would put on to attract more money, more tips.
I got to get
And
that oil because, I'm broke up in. I'm just kidding.
yeah, and it's funny because I look back on that. I'm like, you got to think of the pragmatism of that. Think of that for a
Sure.
second.
Sure.
That deters from my performance as a waitress. And any
Mm.
money I earn, I think, oh man, this is working. Right. And so there comes this it works argument that really is a little counterintuitive because it gives the attention to this, man-made or not man-made, this this rock basically, or this oil, when in reality, you did a good job that night, or you didn't do a good job that night, whatever it is. So I
Mm.
think that it just kind of takes the responsibility off of us.
Yeah. Yeah. Now, how do you navigate you said something that New Thought, for example, kind of sounds very Christian. How can you kind of help my audience understand the importance of being grounded and rooted in kind of solid biblical
Mm.
doctrine? How does that help us navigate identifying and recognizing counterfeits? I think that's such an important ability to have.
I love this question, actually. First, I always say that you need to know what New Thought is. I think that's why I wrote my book, is that I'm like, man, there's been so many books on like New Age. And in those New Age books, maybe some things will be mentioned, maybe in a section about Gnosticism, then this weird thing called New Thought, by Phineas Quimby. And it was this, it was that, it was this. Next. And I'm like, no, it's actually much deeper than that. And so that's really important. What is this? Where did it come from? Why does it sound Christian? And I have a whole chapter about terminology and history. So there's that, understanding what it is. The second thing is really knowing your Bible. This was my problem, is that what New Thought does is that it uses the Bible, right? I mean, I'm sure you studied cults, and that's one of the worst things they do is, if I were Satan, that's exactly what I would do. I wouldn't say,
Mm.
go get away from the Bible. I'd be like, let's misuse it.
Sure.
Let's make this sound a certain way so that whenever it hurts them, that they think that's what God says, right?
Mm.
I hate to say this word, but it's kind of brilliant. I think of Jehovah's Witnesses. They're basically in a cult, and because the Bible is associated with that cult and it's misused,
Sure.
they look at it like it's a hateful thing, and it really deters them from really even wanting to know what it really says. Like those locks really stay on. So in a way, New Thought does that same thing. They take anything in the Bible, and really how it's supposed to be interpreted is what resonates with you, right? So
Mm.
really understanding hermeneutics, how the Bible is supposed to sound in its context. Like, what is it actually saying?
Yeah.
And then the other thing that I would say is the questions to ask yourself when it comes to this, knowing what a counterfeit is. What I think of as an example, my friend Natasha Crane used in her recent book. The book is called When Culture Hates You. And she used this example of a doctor because she was trying to talk about counterfeits and authentic. And the argument that a lot of people give is, well, we just need to know what the counter or the authentic looks like, right? Like really study the authentic.
Mm-hmm.
And she's like, okay, well, imagine a doctor who only studied healthy bodies. That's all they did. They know exactly what a healthy body looks like. And so if somebody sick comes to you, you're like, okay, I know you're not healthy, but I don't know what you're sick with. I don't know what that is. I don't know how to treat you. Here, just go take an Advil and hopefully it works out. What she's saying, and the point that I agree with, is that there is wisdom in understanding. Like, don't be afraid to actually go and understand their arguments. In other words,
Sure.
don't be afraid to go and, like in my book, I had many interviews. I went into these places, had these conversations. It was fascinating.
Can you say the title of your book one more time so folks?
Happy Lies.
Happy Lies. Okay.
Yes. And it's really funny because just this last weekend, people might cringe a little bit at this. But I went to an Esther Hicks workshop. And Esther Hicks, I mentioned her in chapter 7 of my book, In Law of Attraction. She channels a collective consciousness of entities named Abraham. It's a little creepy sounding. And so, but I go because for a lot of reasons. When you're in that space, you're understanding what are they doing? What kind of conversations can I have? What notes can I take? And so I go into these spaces, have these conversations. And so I say that, but also this is a long-winded answer, but let me just kind of end with this. But when you're looking at anything and trying to understand it, you got to ask yourself a few questions. First, Is it new? Does this sound new? Are they trying to tell you this is new information? This is secret. And this is going to make you powerful. This is going to make you feel a certain way. You're going to feel special, right?
Mm.
Is it new? Is it secretive? Um, what is emphasized? What or who is emphasized? This one can be tricky because a lot of times what New Thought will do is that it gives you power, thinking that it's from God, like, oh, this is God's will for you. He wants you to be able to manifest your reality. And then the last thing I'll say on this is who gets the glory when it comes to these kinds of things? Like who is it that whatever you're believing, whatever it is that you're doing, it's very helpful to really parse out who is getting the glory here. Is
Sure.
it me under the guise of God? These are the kinds of things I ask myself when I come across these kinds of things.
Introducing All Access, your premium gateway to deeper apologetic and theological insights. Through Q&A sessions, theological lectures, and exclusive bonus content, All Access takes your learning to the next level. Support the ministry of Apologia Studios while unlocking incredible resources like Ask Me Anything, which is an interactive live stream featuring Jeff Durbin. We have the Academy featuring theological lectures from leading experts and exclusive content from shows like Apologia Radio and Cultish. With more exciting content on the way, there's never been a better time to join. Visit apologiastudios.com and click join to get started today. Yeah. Now, how do they justify the supposed truth of these things? So like when, and I know folks have kind of maybe experiences. You're at Barnes and Noble, right? You're at the Bible section. You're trying to look for a new study Bible or something like that, or pick up Happy Lies by Melissa Dougherty. And all of a sudden, right next to the Bibles, there's the New Age section. Mm-hmm. And you have maybe some young, teenagers or someone in their 20s looking up things on tarot cards and things like that. Mm-hmm. And you get into a conversation with someone, you're like, hey, why do you do that? Like, how do they justify, what they believe to be like actually true?
Yeah, this is a very interesting question. I have another chapter on truth because the epistemology they have is very different, right? So you and I would look at reality, right? Like what corresponds with reality. And we would lean into that. What's actually true about reality, about the Bible, even if we don't like it, like gender, you know what I mean? Like real simple things.
Sure.
But the gender conversation is actually a good point to bring up with this. Not that I'm going to get into that, but it kind of embodies my point here, is that with them, truth is found within. All right. So two new thought words that are very big in the movement are true self and false self, right? So there's two sides of you. And your true self is the divine spark within. That's going to guide you into what's your truth, what's actually true, what works for you. Okay. And it's very feelings oriented. Sure. So if it doesn't feel right, then, well, God must not want that for me. Okay. And another thing is what I call the pain point. A lot of people believe in these things because they've experienced a lot of trauma. The most emotionally sensitive people I know have been involved in New Age and New Thought, and they struggle. It's really difficult for them. What I mean by that, though, with the emotionally sensitive is that they have a very hard time with their feelings. Like they have a very hard time understanding big emotions that they might be having. Maybe they struggle with anxiety, depression. Maybe they're just an overall sensitive person. Maybe they're deeply insecure. Whatever it is, there's trauma that is informing that, right? And that pain is the lens in which they see the world. Okay. So if something brings them pain or hurt, well, that can't be from God. That can't be from the universe. That's something I need to avoid. That's a bad thing. That's a bad vibe. Okay. That's a bad frequency. So you can see how feelings can get involved in this. And then the other thing is that it really makes you look very non-judgmental, open-minded, and tolerant. There's a very big social incentive to believe these things. They don't, in other words, they're not on a truth quest. They're on a happiness quest. That's what my friend Frank Turek would say. It's not that whatever makes them feel loved, whatever makes them feel good, well, then that must be true. And I'm simplifying it. There's a lot more to this because they basically have a relativistic view of truth. And it can be subjective, but for them, truth is from within. They'll read a Bible verse, for example. Say they open the Bible and they'll read a verse. They're like, oh, that doesn't resonate with me. or they reinterpret it to a point where it's misapplied, but hey, it resonates with
Sure.
me. What does this verse mean to
Sure.
you? Same with the New Age. This is why, by the way, I have discovered why you will find them always in a good mood all the time because they really do try to stay they try to stay on a high vibe. But number two, they also want to be around people that are positive. Because at least in my old crowd, it was if you want to manifest something, right? If you're wanting results, in other words, you can't be around negative people, right? And so there's a social incentive for it. It makes you look really loving, really nice, very tolerant. And so, I mean, I would say it's an amalgamation of those things, but it's a big conversation to have about what relativism is and how they see it. Yeah.
And how do they respond to, I mean, if they're relativistic, are they the kind of people that like, all religions are kind of roads to the truth? I mean, I remember there was someone on Facebook, I guess I went to high school with this person and she had posted something where she said, all religions are true. And I'm like, this sounds off. And I'm like, what about the religions that say you're wrong? Are those the true ones too? And she was like, didn't respond. Do they ever think self-reflectively about this idea of like all things are true in a sense, or all religions lead to the truth? I mean, how do they understand that? And how might we have kind of an apologetic touch point in terms of communicating with them?
Yeah. So it does depend on the person you're talking to, but generally speaking, yes.
Okay.
I believed that even as a Christian, I had some wishy-washy, I don't want to judge beliefs about it. But yeah, there is a tendency to say, yeah, whatever works for you, that's your religion, right? That's your belief system or whatever it is. And that's your path. And I need to respect that, right? And you just let it go. You can't judge, kind of thing. The number one rule is thou shalt not judge. What I like to start with is a geeky word called prolegomena. It's a seminary word. But I love
There she goes. She's flipping out those $100 words.
Man,
we get it, Melissa. You're educated. All right.
Man, everybody's going to think I'm smart now. I'm like, not. But I made up a little song to remember how to pronounce it. Okay. So
there you go. There you go.
I learned it in seminary. And basically it's systematic theology. Like you're learning about, scripture, the Bible. What does the Bible say? Who is God? Attributes of God, right? Right.
Sure.
But these are like first principle stuff, like the things before the things. Like you're talking about, number one, does God even exist? Right? Number two, what is truth? What even is that? And number three, can miracles happen? This is basically the essence of the first base before you even go into the Bible. Because here's where you and I might disagree on this, because I know you're a precept guy. But like for me, my favorite thing to start with is a truth claim. Because a lot of Christians might want to jump to the Bible. Well, the Bible says this. They're going to be like, so that's your standard. You can preach at me all day about what the Bible says. I don't even believe that.
Sure.
Right? And so what I'm going for, I'm like, okay, well, what do you believe about this then? Who is God? Let's feel you out. What is God? This and that. Okay, well, it's the universe. Well, how does that work then? And you're just asking questions. For me, getting them to think is very important, because then they came up with the thought on their own. And a lot of times the Holy Spirit can really work in that way. But my favorite thing is truth. Okay, well, tell me what you see about truth. Tell me about this. Tell me about that. Because you're really move the goalposts. Make it as ridiculous as you can. Ask the crazy questions. And a lot of this is in the book. Sure. I had these conversations and I'm pushing as far as I can to try to get them to admit a position. It's real squishy, right? It's like a laser pointer. Like they do not want to make a declarative position as to, number one, not satisfy their false self. I know that sounds weird, but I have a whole chapter on progressive Christianity. This is one thing they have in common, is that the beliefs I have are false because they're built on me from society. My true self is what I'm trying to get to, right? So you have to question everything that's coming in. Is this my true self or is this my false self? So you stay in this constant drone of uncertainty, and it's so frustrating. Because I'm talking to them. I'm like, what do you believe about this? I'm like, I believe this. I'm like, okay, what about that? I'm like, I believe that too. I'm like, well, these things contradict. Yeah, okay.
That's
No,
right.
no, wait, hold on, right? And so it's like going back to the drawing board. And there was this one reverend, I was having this conversation. It was my favorite. It's turning out to be my favorite interview because of how fun it was, like how
Sure.
ridiculous it turned out. And he was a nice guy. Like he was actually so cool to like even jam with me. He wasn't, all these people were amazing, by the way. Nobody
Yeah.
got mad at me. Everybody let me ask the most ridiculous questions. They didn't get offended. It was really
Okay.
cool.
It's the good
And
vibes. You need the good
it
vibes.
was the good vibes. Well, and they want to have these conversations, but the problem is that they won't stick on something. And this guy, it's so funny. The origin of this question came from a sitcom called Reba. I don't know if anybody's ever watched that show. It's a really good
I
show. It's
watched
funny.
some episodes with my wife.
Okay.
Okay, it's my wife suggested it. It wasn't I didn't intentionally try to watch it, but we've seen a couple
Yeah.
of episodes. So
Well, some people might recognize this question because I was watching the series as I was going and writing through this chapter. And I don't know, maybe when I was having this interview or something, I was I
Reba.
was I was doing the research and then I was doing the interview. And I remember just during this span, I was watching Reba. Well, one of the characters, she's kind of ditzy, Cheyenne,
Yes.
and she says, tobacco can be a vegetable. And I was like, that's funny, right? Okay. And I remembered it. And so I'm doing this interview with the guy. And I was like, you know what? Okay, what if I said my truth is that tobacco can be a vegetable? I'm like, that works for me, right? Pragmatism, very big new thought thing and new age. I was like, this works for me. I like this. This is my truth. And he looks at me dead in the eye and he's like, that's stupid. I was like, so you would tell me
Right.
hypothetically, this person, I'm paraphrasing the interview. This is how it went though. But I was like, would you tell them that? And he's like, yeah, that's dumb. I'm like, okay, right. So that's the starting point. I ask him, these are all truth questions. I'm just asking him where he stands in his position on certain things. And we get to a point in the conversation where I think I was asking something ridiculous about gender. Like this guy believes he's a unicorn or something like that. I asked something kind of ridiculous. And I was like, well, he's like, well, that's their truth. That's something that they believe. And maybe they have some sort of secret spiritual knowledge that I don't know about. Who am I to judge? Okay. Right. And so I'm getting him to think about this, think about this, think about this, think about this. How far is he going to move the goalposts? And then at the end of the conversation, because of what he just laid out, I asked him, I'm like, so can tobacco be a vegetable? And then he thinks and he's like, yeah,
Maybe it
tobacco
can.
can be a vegetable.
You should have
And
ended it that's stupid and just walked away. He could have turned that around on him.
I'm so mad that I didn't do that.
So now
So good.
what you're doing is actually very similar to what presuppositionalists tend to do is what
Yeah.
you're doing by asking kind of the truth questions. You're actually asking questions and doing what we call an internal critique,
Mm.
so that when they express some kind of view, then you challenge them or through
Yes.
questions, right, as to whether they're consistent with their own standards.
Yeah.
So
Yes.
that's very similar. I mean, we call it
Yeah.
internal critique as opposed to external critique. So, kind of same concept, different language, if that makes
Mhm.
sense. Yeah.
Well, and then we get into morality, and that's
Mm,
interesting too, because then we get into how far are you going to move the goalposts here as to not be judgmental.
sure.
There's so many ways you can get that. And notice, here's the thing. Notice that you haven't even yet gotten to who is Jesus, right?
Mm.
Like you're getting them to think about their position, and then you mosey on over into like, okay, well, who is Jesus? What about that? And then you can get into talking about, a lot of them have issues with the Bible. Okay,
Sure.
well, tell me about that. What do you mean by that? What are the issues you're talking about? Well, it's been corrupted by who?
Well,
When?
that
Where?
was the question, and those are great questions because a lot of people make those claims. That was a question I was going to ask you, and it kind
Mm,
of slipped my mind, but it came
sure.
back. Is that what are some of the most common misconceptions that New Agers and New Thoughters have of Christianity? Because obviously they if they're mixing in Christian categories within their own system, they are somewhat acquainted with Christianity. Like, what are some
Mhm.
common misunderstandings that you find when you have these conversations and they say, well, but Christianity teaches fill in the blank? Is there anything that sticks out to you that is a common thread in a lot of what these folks say?
Yes, some of it
Okay.
is straw man. I'll go over a
Okay.
few. One of
Okay.
them is their overall conception of Christians as a whole, which, by the way, is one of the biggest deterrents for them,
Mm.
is they think that we are just closed-minded, judgmental freaks. They think we are anti-intellectual, and rather stupid. They kind of have this
That's
They
true
kind of
for
look
them,
down.
not for us, though. That's true for them. It's true for you. It's true for you.
I'm saying what blew my, I didn't even know there was a realm called apologetics.
Mm,
If I had known that, I'm like, man, Christians are smart. Okay. Because that's one reason why I went into these teachings, is that they sounded very intellectual. I'm like, oh, y'all are asking really good questions and you dare to think about these things. And whereas my experience was the opposite, it was just like, don't ask those questions. Or nobody knew.
sure.
Nobody knew, especially, and I'm a female, obviously. And, in women's Bible studies, I was very frustrated. I was very frustrated because I really wanted to learn the Bible. I wanted to go and have some sweet sister in Christ who's older and smarter than me explain to me what a wineskin is. I'm like, what is this? I don't understand what Jesus is saying. Like, I'm so dense.
Sure.
I'm like, you have 2,000-year-old gospels, right? And then thousands of, what's happening? Why do we need a sacrifice? What's up with hell? And okay, so there's that. So, the other misconception they have, okay, let's talk about hell and all that thing. Okay, they'll take the Bible, and number one, they'll say that there's tons of mistakes in it, that it was written by, maybe well-meaning white men. Some people don't understand like that it's a
Well-meaning white men.
well-meaning white men, that it's a Middle Eastern book. This one always
Yeah.
gets me. It confuses me. I'm like, where did you learn that? Like, who do you
Yeah.
think wrote the Bible?
Well, the Constantine wrote the book.
Exactly. That was my next thing. Yes, this is probably the number one thing.
Sure.
Constantine put the Bible together at the Council of Nicaea. This has been debunked more times than I think should be. Well, I'm like,
Yeah.
this makes its rounds. And that gives them reason to kind of disregard it. The other one is the that this is also really odd. This has to do with the Bible too, that we take it literally. They think that's wrong. They think that we shouldn't do that.
Sure.
Because there's things missing in the Bible, God brings up people. This is what I used to believe too. Brings up these spiritual leaders to kind of fill in those gaps. The other thing they believe is that there's missing books. There's just missing information. So you can
Okay.
get all these other people in these other books to kind of, again, fill in those gaps. Of course, hell, there is no belief in hell. And let's take Jesus for a second. So the way that they would see Jesus, they disagree with us on our view of Jesus. In fact, there's a lot of New Thought fathers that chided. One of them was Ralph Waldo Emerson, by the way, who scolded. He has a very famous speech he gave back at this time, and it was at a university. He got a lot of heat for it at the time, but he scolded the Christian church for making Jesus out to be an object of worship. He said that he's like, you're God, like you're the divine. Jesus wouldn't want this. Jesus would not want you to be thinking these things. He's saying, you're the Christ, I'm the Christ. We all are the I am, which, by the way, affirmations and I am statements are very New Thought. So, I mean, there's so many that I could go on. But the problem is this. Here's the number one problem. I can name all of these things, but the issue is that they don't come on our side to understand it from our perspective. It's a
Sure.
lot of straw man. And it's a lot of deflection because it all goes back to the pain point. They don't want to understand. And the ones that do, you can spot them. You can spot them. You can tell. You're like, oh, okay, you're curious. And I think that's where our methodologies matter. You can have all the knowledge in the world, but if you're not a good listener, like if you're coming up to somebody and you're talking at them, and I've seen this before. I have a friend, very, very knowledgeable, knows way more than me, but has no people skills.
Okay.
They'll go out street evangelizing because they're passionate, but
Sure.
they do not have very productive conversations, and every conversation is an argument. And so I'm not saying, to go and be buds with them or anything. I'm saying learn some people skills, learn critical thinking, logic, like learn how to get them to think for themselves. It's not your job to convert them. And I think once we kind of take that down and we're trying to understand what they believe and why, there's something there where they're like, well, what do you believe? Why do you believe that? And it's not that it opens a door. It's just that it takes their guard down, because a lot of them, and here's the last thing I'll say is church
Sure.
hurt.
Yeah.
Yeah. They've been hurt by Christians. A
Yeah.
lot of them have. And it is
that's-
on them because they can't see past that pain.
Sure. That's interesting how you talk about the pain points there, because how we approach people, you're right, it matters, and it's interesting to see how what is the appropriate way to approach a Muslim and how that differs with how you approach someone who has the background of like the New Age or New Thought. Like one sometimes requires a more aggressive approach, but then that's not necessarily the case when you're talking to someone from the New Age or New Thought. I think that's interesting to kind of, was you talking about learning people skills, that we really need to be able to have a balance and understand and recognize the context of who and what we're talking about and with.
Read the room.
Yeah, and read the room. What can you speak to that then? So I'm a very personable kind of guy. You seem obviously a very personable kind of woman. How do you read the room? What are some techniques that help you get kind of like these hints like, okay, this is appropriate in this context, and I probably don't want to say this in that context? Is there things that pop in your head, or you think it comes more naturally to you?
I love this question. I talk about this a lot because I think this is one thing that we as a church need to work on. Part of it is listening. We want to talk a lot, and I get it. I do. But here's how I see it, okay? Oh, and by the way, a really good book for this is Greg Koukl's book, Tactics.
Sure.
Phenomenal. What that man does is he basically takes logic and puts it into talking skills. You're just asking thought-provoking questions. And it's brilliant. The reason why it comes up is that what I think of is a chessboard, and the cover of his book is a chessboard.
Right.
And what you're doing is it's not like you're trying to strategically get them, in line. It's that you're being mindful of what they're saying, and you're being careful about what you're saying, right? It's like you're seeing this chessboard and you're strategizing. You're like, oh, okay, they're kind of sensitive. Okay. Well, tell me your story. What's your background? Like, what do you believe? Well, why do you believe that? Well, hold on a second. If you believe that, assisted suicide is a thing with beyond, somebody being terminally ill, then aren't you like pro-suicide then? How does that work? I don't know. I don't know. Like, and that's just a social issue. Think of like scriptural issues. Like, okay, you don't believe Jesus rose again from the grave. Why? Where did you read that? Oh, I saw it in this, this book or that book. Like, who is that? Oh, so they're not Christian. Okay, where would they get that idea from? Right. And it's just like you're asking them questions. They're not used to this. Okay, what they're used to. Yeah, they're not used to having somebody that has an answer for what they believe. In my experience, I just had this happen this weekend, actually, at the Esther Hicks conference. There was this one woman who went up, and I knew she was a thinker. I was like, oh, she's different. She asked a very interesting question. I wonder what her story is. And so I pray about it. But afterwards, we had a really good conversation, and we're like having coffee next week, right? And that's kind of the thing. It's like Jehovah's Witness. Okay, and here's the other thing. This is going to sound so silly, but my first love in ministry were the cults, like learning about cults and stuff like that, and high control groups. And my favorite was the Jehovah's Witnesses. Because what you learn is how to talk to them. You learn. Here's the thing. This is the main point. The main takeaway is insight, which is the ability to take you out of your position and put yourself in theirs. Why do they see the cross as a stake? Can I use that language with them so that they can understand that? Or am I going to be really like prideful about it? Can I come on their level and understand what they believe and why they believe it? And then all of a sudden it's like you can understand their language. So that's basically what I'm trying to say. What you're doing is you're trying to understand a language. And once you know how to speak it, you can spot it. Like I remember being able to think, oh, that Jehovah's Witness is different. Like they're not asking questions that they're allowed to ask.
Sure.
And that's kind of where I would feel like, oh, maybe I should ask them some questions. So, I mean, I know that's a lot, but that's kind of what I do. I listen, I ask questions. I'm genuinely interested. I am not trying to gotcha. I am genuinely interested in their perspective. I'm not there I might get some heat for this. I'm not there to convert them. I'm not. I think I have a modest goal. My goal, and this is what Greg would say, my goal is to put a stone in your shoe. I want to bother you. I want to ask a question. Yeah. I want to ask a question that you can't stop thinking about.
Yeah.
and because it just takes the stress off of you,
Sure,
you know?
sure, sure. I very much resonate with the idea of putting your feet into their shoes. I think this whole
Mm-hmm.
issue of understanding their language. I remember reading Walter
Mm-hmm.
Martin's The Kingdom of the Cult, and I think one of the first chapters, I think it's called Scaling the Language Barrier.
Mm-hmm.
Dr. Martin understood that you cannot effectively communicate with these people if you don't know how they're using terms, especially when you're talking with people who use the similar sounding vocabulary as we as Christians use, right? Salvation is different for the Mormon than it is for kind of an evangelical Christian. So, how would you kind of give advice to my listeners as to how to begin to learn the language if they find themselves in an actual confrontation or conversation, not so much like you should read this book or read that book. Obviously, we should all study, but how can I, on the job, so to speak, like right there, I'm talking to a Jehovah's Witness. How can you help us navigate learning the language on the spot? What sort of things should we be doing?
Mm-hmm. It goes back to what I was saying. If it were me, I would, what do you mean by that? Is such a good question. Okay. It's like, what do you mean by that? Where did that come from? When you're saying you're talking about Jesus, okay, he's not God. What does that look like? You know, and all you're doing is knowing where they put their chess pieces.
Mm,
Like you're playing on a board where you don't even know where their pieces are. And so once you understand, oh, that's how they see us. Oh, okay. That's how they see Jesus. Okay. And then you learn that, you know, maybe the three things that they're the most drilled into their head are hell, the eternal soul, and the Trinity. Like they are drilled in their head to talk about those three things and debunk those three things. So you're like, okay, I'm going to ask them about something they're not so, you
mm,
know, because that's the three things that we want to talk about, right? Like we want to.
sure.
So this is just Jehovah's Witnesses. You can talk about, you can think about, okay, well, where are they not going that I can kind of go and ask more questions? That might take a little bit more research, but if you're like on the fly, right, and you're having these conversations, it should be very natural to you to have a healthy curiosity. You are
Mm,
not sinning. You're not doing anything wrong. You are being wise. You are
mm,
being wise as a serpent, gentle as a dove, and you're going into your battlefield knowing where the mines are. Okay. You're
mm,
going into your battle, and all it takes, it's so simple. I know this sounds really simple, but this is literally what I love doing. If I'm talking with somebody that disagrees with me, I'm not there to tell them what I believe yet. I'm
mm,
there. I'm like, where are you at? Tell me what you're going through, you know, like, and let me feel this out a little bit. And then I'm always really upfront, man. When they ask me like, well, who are you? What do you do? I'm like, yeah, I'm a Christian apologist. I don't agree with any of this or whatever it is. But you give a little bit, right? And it's
sure.
just, okay, what can they handle? Where do you go? And some people are wide open. They're like, yeah, I don't believe that at all. I'm like, well, why not? Tell me why you don't believe it. I had one person, he's very familiar with my channel, and he recognized me, right? And so we get a conversation starting. He's like, nope, I'm not going there with you. I'm like, well, you already know what I'm going to say. Come on, have a conversation with me. You already know what I'm going to ask. And you know me better than I know you. And he's like, nope, I'm not going there. And I'm like, I'll take that as a compliment. Whatever, man. You know, but it was fun, right? Like, it's like, I'm not going in there to be an aggressor.
Sure.
And I think that's the other thing. The last thing I'll say on this is we have a tendency to get triggered ourselves.
Mm,
And again, I say this probably because I'm more familiar with females kind of going out into they there's something in their pain point, right? Like there's
sure.
something where they are afraid of being challenged themselves because they're afraid I might doubt my faith.
Mm.
And I'm going to say something really weird, maybe controversial. Good.
She's like,
Good.
it's your channel, it's not mine. So I'll just get this out there.
The reason why is you got to know what you believe and why you believe it. You
Sure.
have, if it's true, it'll stand on its own. And that's the beauty of apologetics. That's the beauty of having these conversations. If it's true, you should not be afraid. It means we probably have our own stuff that we got to work out and work through, that might be triggering us. And I think that's what I'll end with, is that we got to watch that. We got to, you know, I think we have our defenses up. And so when we go into these conversations, we're afraid to ask questions.
Mm.
And I'm just here to say, don't be afraid.
Yeah. Yeah, that's great. I have two more questions, and then we'll wrap things up
Sure.
here. And this has been super.
I'll try to make it short.
Super useful.
These are long
Oh, no
answers.
worries. No, I wanted. That's why I have you on. I want to hear what you have to say, and I know that folks would appreciate it. And I'm going to ask this question, and hopefully I will listen to your answer and make sure I didn't forget the second question.
Write it down, man.
I was like, I can't, there's nowhere to write. Even my keyboard's like so far away from me. People don't see the struggle right now. If I'm going to type something down, I'll get super close to the camera and
Well, I have an idea. How about ask them both and I'll be your second brain.
Okay. Let me see if oh man, now it's fun. Okay. So I'm going to do the one that I remember. Okay. I remember both of them. Okay. So I just recently spoke with some Jehovah's Witnesses, had a great conversation. It went really well, and they left with a lot to think about. Okay, so my approach is a little bit different than some of the things you were saying, but a lot of it's the same because I think we both have very similar influences.
And there's probably things I left out and forgot too. And
oh yeah, no worries. But I think the biggest challenge in talking to a Jehovah's Witness is not giving off that you know more. In other words, like once you start exemplifying and evidencing that, like, I know my theology, I know logic, I know once you start flexing in that way, they can just shut down or like, oh, well, we got to go. How do you navigate, like, when your conversations are like, oh, well, she kind of sounds like she knows what she's talking about. Like, do I want to continue to have this conversation? Do you play dumb a little bit so that you can keep them longer? Like, what is that? How does that work
100%. One of the first things I learned with a Jehovah's Witness is they're not there to learn from you. They are there to teach you why you're wrong.
Okay.
And so 100%, I take on the student role.
Okay.
I do not go in saying, I do not go in with my head held high, so to speak, with I know everything about your religion. I know more about your religion than you probably know, right? Like I don't go in, tell me about you. Tell me for the 100th time about, your gospel, and then you kind of go from there, and it's not like a cookie cutter, but nope. I understand exactly what you're saying though. Like it's what they're going to say. Everything's scripted. Going to the memorial, going to the conventions, right? It's so boring. But I mean, it's interesting to see what's changed. That's for me, that's the hardest part, is what did you believe last year that you don't believe in anymore? That's frustrating for me. Because then you have you're like, oh, I know the answer to this. And then like, I don't believe that anymore. Okay, let's talk about new light. Okay, what is this new light thing, And that's how I would handle it. I do not go in with them knowing that I know what they know. Yeah.
It can be challenging. I remember, so in the Colossians passage where they talk about Christ being the creator of all other things,
Yes.
I have to like softly navigate. It's like, well, I've studied this a little bit and I realized that the word other is actually not in the Greek. In that text. I mean, and I try to be super humble about it. Like, I'm not a Greek scholar, but when I was studying, I mean, there's two words in Greek for other, allos and heteros. And I explain it really quick. And Paul could have used either of them, but he doesn't. What do you say about that? And I'm like hoping that's not too much for them to run away, but they usually kind of grapple with it and like, well, I never thought about that before. So it is a very difficult balance trying to like not show too much, but at the same time, you want to make a point that you think might connect really well. So it is definitely an art, I think. It's an art and a science, I think. And
oh my gosh, I can't forget this. My best resource were ex-Jehovah's Witnesses. Because there was one friend in particular, she was just giving me the inside stuff, right? She's like, this will mess them up. Like they don't go here. For example, my favorite thing to discuss with a Jehovah's Witness is Romans 8. Because they don't believe that the Holy Spirit can dwell in you. It's only in the 144,000. And so if you're in other sheep, you don't have God's Spirit. Well, in Romans 8, it's like, well, okay, how do you please God then? Because here it's saying it's impossible to please him, right? And there's lots of questions to go there with that. But I like to go off the beaten path. I don't like to focus on yet. Maybe we'll get there. But I'm like, let's go somewhere else. Hey, what's this interlinear right here? Like I don't see that this is in your Bible. Tell me about that. They're like, I don't know. And that's where I like to go with it.
Okay, that's super helpful. Now, my last question for you, and then we'll wrap things up, is whether it's talking to folks of New Age, New Thought, Jehovah's Witness, or whatever, has there ever been a question or objection that they've raised that you felt completely stumped?
Hmm.
And then to piggyback off of that, how did you deal with it in real time?
Oh, I
Like,
100% think that they have.
okay,
Trying to think of one though. I know that they have.
they've done it so few times, you just can't remember it.
No, I know that they have because I mean, I try to journal it like the conversations and
Sure.
sometimes I'll put like a big question mark or something. Mm, I want to think about this because I know that they have put forth questions where, okay, I'll tell you I'll tell you the two things that I struggle with when it
Okay.
comes to talking with them. Okay. So if they bring up something, I'm like, how am I going to navigate this one? And it's typically if hell or evil comes up, right?
Mm,
Because their beliefs about, how could a loving God send somebody to hell, right?
sure.
And I don't care who you are. You are lying if you don't have some sort of something that you struggle with. It's just how we are as Christians. Like we can have our faith and we know, right? We know what we believe and why we believe it. And on those days that maybe we're struggling with these whatever it is, that's where the truth of what you believe really comes in, opposed
Mm,
to how you feel about it.
sure.
So for me, this goes back to my spiritual past. This goes back to my spiritual troubles because one of the things that I'm fine with it now. Like I believe why there's a hell, right? And I understand philosophically, biblically why there has to be one. But if they are asking me like, okay, for example, oh, here's one. I remember there was a mother who had lost her daughter, okay? An adult daughter, and this mother is older, sweetest woman, so kind. She's a new thoughter. And we got into this topic of what's your biggest issues with the Christian church? One of them was hell.
Mm,
She's like, I cannot believe a God that has a hell at all. Because if I believe what, the fundamentalist Christians say, which is a derogatory term in these circles, then that means I'll never see my daughter again because she was not a Christian. She was
mm,
like a devoted something, like a pagan or something like that. And she's like, I can't believe that there, with all the good that I do, with all of this and all that. And of course we would go into, well, nobody's good, blah, blah, blah. She doesn't want to hear that, right?
sure.
There is none of that. Like there's definite pain behind there. So it doesn't stump me. I struggle with it, right? Like in other words,
Like an
this is my
emotional
struggle is
struggle?
that
Not
I
mo
struggle because like, is your struggle intellectual or is your struggle emotional?
mm,
If your struggle is intellectual, that's a little easier. If it's emotional, that's hard. That's a lot harder.
sure.
And so it's that kind of stumps me up sometimes. Whenever there's an emotional reaction to why somebody won't believe what they believe, it's difficult for me to even go on questioning when I'm like, this person is hurting, right? It's like,
Sure.
this is why I do face-to-face conversations because it's hard to forget that people are made in the image of God when you're staring at them in the face. Like you're
Sure.
staring at them in the eye, like you're seeing their hurt. But that's kind of my point, though, is that there's an empathy that we need to have, but it doesn't deter what's actually true. So
Mm,
that's probably where I would be like, okay, well, where do I go from here? You know what I mean?
yeah.
And I consoled her, but I also have to understand, like, okay, when do I know that I don't need to go on anymore? So
Mm,
that's probably the best example off the top of my head. I know there's more. I know that people have asked me things that I'm like, I actually don't know. Like I can
yeah.
look that up. I know there's an answer to it. I just don't know it right now.
Sure.
And
Sure.
yeah, yeah,
And I think such an important thing. We need to learn to master the art of admitting we don't know.
yeah,
When
yeah.
I speak
That's a
places and
good point.
or I'm teaching my students or whatever, and they're like, if someone asks you a question that you don't know the answer to, you look at them and you lean forward and you say, I don't know. That's a good question. There's nothing wrong with that. It doesn't mean you lose. It doesn't mean they got the better of you. Being honest, I think, also opens up, a passage for a future conversation.
Hmm.
Instead of just kind of answering every single question, and then if I'm not really sure, but I'm just going to spit this out. I think people are looking for authenticity,
I
and
was
that
just thinking, yeah, I was
yeah,
just thinking
yeah,
that.
that's
Yeah,
the buzzword, right? Authenticity, right? But
yeah.
it's true, it's true, and I think Christians can do a better job in that area. So.
Hmm. Yeah.
So Melissa, thank you so much. I'm speaking with Melissa. Is it Dougherty? Am I saying your name correctly?
You know what I say? My husband told me this when we got married because I'm like, what is your last name? I'm like, I mean, if we fall in love and get married,
Melissa
he's like,
D. I'll
Yeah,
call you
Miss Melissa
D.
D. He's like, if you can say 40, you can say Doherty. Rhyme it together.
Okay.
40 Doherty.
Okay, so Melissa. So I'm speaking with Melissa Dougherty. If you are familiar with her channel, awesome. If you're not, you can put this video on pause and hop over to her YouTube channel and press that subscribe button. She's got some excellent resource, excellent interviews as well. I'm sitting in the seat of the interviewer, but she conducts excellent interviews. I remember you had a really good interview with Wesley Huff.
Yeah, my friend Wesley. Oh, on the Council of Nicaea, many times.
Yeah. And you just ask really good questions that I think
Thanks.
touch on like what the average person would want to know. So it's very, very practical. So I highly recommend folks check out her channel if you're not already familiar with that. Any last words? If you want to plug your book one more time, and then we'll wrap things up here.
Sure. It's called Happy Lies, How a Movement You've Probably Never Heard of Shaped Our Self-Obsessed World. It's right here. Actually, I'm a semi-professional artist, so I actually designed that. And
Okay.
after the book cover, it helps you kind of remember it. But yeah, it's about the New Thought movement. And
right.
yeah, what else you said, I don't remember. But yeah, that's my book plug.
All right. Now, this is not your first book, is it?
No, it's my first and probably my last.
Okay.
I did not want to write. Yeah, it was tough writing, but I'm so glad I did it.
Okay, awesome. Well, thank you. I know that you're super busy too, so I appreciate you making the time to come onto my channel, and I really enjoyed our discussion. So, folks, I hope that this discussion was useful to you and a blessing to you. And until next time, guys, take care and God bless. Bye-bye.